It was early morning in the city, the kind of morning where the air felt cold enough to sting the skin but quiet enough for you to hear your own thoughts. People hurried down the sidewalks with cups of hot coffee in their hands, jackets pulled tight around their bodies, eyes half open as they tried to start another busy day. Among the steady footsteps and the honking of cars, a small figure sat near the corner of a cafe. She looked fragile, wrapped in an old coat that had lost its color long ago. A wool blanket rested over her knees, and beside her sat a little tin cup with only a few coins inside. Most people walked past without looking. A few kind souls dropped a coin in the cup. She would always smile, lift her head and whisper a soft, "Thank you," her voice calm and gentle like a warm whisper in cold air. No one really knew her name. To most people in the area, she was simply Grandma. She had become part of the street, always sitting at the same spot, always wearing that same kind smile. Some said she had been there for years, but no one knew where she came from or how she ended up there. Across the street was a small music studio. It wasn't fancy, just a narrow building with glass doors and the sound of instruments echoing from inside. A young man worked there, usually the first to arrive in the morning. Every day when he unlocked the doors, he noticed the old woman watching from her corner. She didn't say much. She just looked toward the studio, eyes fixed on the instruments being carried in and out. One morning, he was setting up a small keyboard for a student lesson when he noticed her again. The way she stared at the piano keys through the window made him pause. It wasn't curiosity in her eyes. It was something deeper, something that looked like memory. He decided to step outside for a moment. "Good morning," he said kindly. "Cold day, huh?" She nodded slowly, smiling as if she'd heard those words 1,000 times. Her voice was thin but steady when she spoke. "The cold keeps you awake. The quiet helps you listen." He didn't understand what she meant, but he chuckled politely. "You like music?" he asked, noticing her eyes drift back toward the piano in the studio. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Once upon a time," she said softly, "I used to make pianos sing." The young man thought she was just being poetic. "Make pianos sing?" he repeated with a light laugh. "That's a nice way to put it." She didn't laugh with him. Instead, she looked down at her folded hands and said, "It's not a way to put it. It's the truth. Every piano has a soul. You just have to know how to talk to it." Her words caught him off guard. He looked at her again, at her tired eyes, the wrinkles that told stories of long years and the faint tremble in her hands. For a moment he wondered if she really was a musician once, but he had lessons to prepare, so he wished her a good day and went back inside. Still, the image of her sitting there stayed in his mind. Over the next few days he found himself watching her more often. Sometimes he noticed her tapping her fingers against her blanket, as though she were playing invisible keys. Other times she would hum to herself, low and steady, like she was remembering a song that no one else could hear anymore. People in the cafe had grown used to her presence. Some even brought her tea or a small sandwich. She always said thank you and never asked for more. There was something peaceful about her, a quiet dignity, even though she had so little. One evening when the studio closed, the young man saw her still sitting in the same spot. The streetlights had come on and the cold had deepened. He hesitated before walking over. "You should find somewhere warm tonight," he said gently. She looked up at him and smiled. "Don't worry about me, dear. I've known colder nights." Then, almost to herself, she added, "Music used to keep me warm." That sentence struck him. Music kept her warm. He didn't know exactly what she meant, but he could tell there was truth behind those words. He wanted to ask more and about who she was, what she used to do, but before he could, she was already leaning back against the wall, her eyes half closed as if she were lost in a dream. The next morning, the cafe owner came out early to unlock the door. She was surprised to find Grandma still there, softly humming again. "You must love this spot," the cafe owner said kindly. "It's near the piano," Grandma replied, nodding toward the instrument inside. The cafe owner laughed. "That old thing? It's been sitting there for years. Doesn't even sound right anymore." Grandma tilted her head. "Even broken things can sing," she said quietly. The cafe owner didn't think much of it, but her words stayed with her. Later that morning, as customers filled the place and the smell of coffee filled the air, Grandma was invited inside to warm up for a bit. She sat near the corner, sipping tea that someone had given her. The piano stood a few feet away, its wood faded, its keys uneven in color. Grandma kept staring at it. The cafe owner noticed and smiled. "Go ahead, Grandma. Give it a try if you still remember how." People chuckled softly. They didn't expect much from a 96-year-old woman with shaky hands. But Grandma stood slowly, using the edge of the table for balance. She walked to the piano, touched the lid gently, and opened it like she was greeting an old friend. Her fingers hovered over the keys. For a moment, the cafe buzzed with the usual sound of cups and conversation. But then she pressed one note, just one. The sound was soft, hesitant, a little out of tune. Then another note, and another. Slowly, the notes began to connect, forming a melody that felt alive. The chatter in the cafe stopped. People turned their heads. The young man from the studio who happened to walk in for his morning coffee froze in place. What he heard didn't sound like random playing. It sounded like emotion, deep and pure. Her fingers danced across the keys with grace, even though her hands trembled. The sound that came out was unlike anything they had heard from that old piano. It wasn't just music, it was storytelling without words. Some notes were tender, others heavy with sorrow, but all of them came together like a memory being spoken aloud. Customers sat silently. Even the barista stopped mid-pour. For a few minutes, the cafe was completely still except for the music. When she finally stopped, the room stayed quiet. Then slowly, people began to clap. Not the kind of quick clapping people do to be polite. It was heartfelt. Some had tears in their eyes. Grandma looked around, startled by the attention. She smiled shyly and whispered, "Thank you." Then she returned to her seat as if nothing special had happened. The young man approached her. "That was incredible," he said, almost whispering. "Where did you learn to play like that?" She gave a small smile. "When I was young, music was my home. I played wherever there was a piano. It didn't matter if the hall was full or empty. The piano was always listening." He wanted to ask more, but before he could, she began humming again, the same melody she had just played. It was hauntingly beautiful. After that day, people started noticing her more. They didn't just see an old homeless woman anymore. They saw someone with a story, someone who carried years of unspoken memories in her heart and poured them out through music. The cafe owner told her she could come inside any time to warm up. And sometimes when the place was quiet, Grandma would sit at the piano again, every time she played. The same thing happened, silence, stillness, then awe. No one understood how someone who had nothing could create something so beautiful. The young man began bringing her small gifts, a sandwich, a warm scarf, a cup of soup. He didn't do it out of pity. He did it because he felt drawn to her music. It made him feel something he couldn't explain, as if the world slowed down and made sense again when she played. One night, as the cafe lights dimmed and the last customers left, Grandma sat alone at the piano. Her eyes were closed and her fingers gently rested on the keys. The young man watched from a distance. She wasn't playing for anyone now. She was playing for herself. The sound was faint, like a lullaby carried by wind. He could tell she wasn't just remembering music. She was remembering a life. When she finished, she looked at the piano one last time and whispered, "Thank you for remembering me." The young man didn't understand what she meant, but he knew one thing for sure. This woman was no ordinary street beggar. There was something hidden behind her quiet eyes, something powerful waiting to be told. And that night, as he locked the studio doors, he promised himself he would find out who she really was. The morning after the old woman first played in the cafe, the place felt different. The piano that had been collecting dust for years suddenly seemed alive again. People came in, whispering about what they had seen the day before. Some didn't even believe it. They said, "No way an old lady like her played that beautifully." Others argued, "You should have been here." It was like she became someone else when she touched those keys. By noon, even strangers from nearby blocks came just to see if she would play again. The cafe owner smiled at the growing crowd but wasn't sure how to handle it. She didn't want to turn the old woman into a show. Still, everyone seemed touched by something deeper than curiosity. It wasn't about performance. It was about what they felt when she played. The old woman came as usual, wrapped in her faded coat and soft scarf. She didn't seem to notice the whispers or the extra eyes watching her. She greeted everyone with her gentle smile, placed her tin cup beside her chair, and ordered her usual cup of tea. The cafe owner leaned over the counter and said kindly, "You made quite an impression yesterday. People can't stop talking about you." The old woman chuckled lightly. "I didn't mean to cause a fuss," she said. "I just missed the sound of real keys beneath my fingers." "You can play any time you like," the owner replied warmly. "That piano hasn't sounded that good in years." After a quiet moment, she stood up and slowly made her way to the instrument again. The crowd hushed the moment she sat down. She placed her thin fingers on the keys, pressing a few softly as if testing their patience. Then she began. The melody this time was slower, deeper, almost like a conversation between her and the piano. Every note seemed to carry a piece of her memory. Some tones were joyful, others heavy, but all were honest. The cafe, once full of chatter and laughter, fell silent again. People forgot their coffee, forgot the time, forgot where they were. When she finished, the room filled with quiet applause. Not loud or rushed, just pure appreciation. A few people even left money near her cup, but she didn't notice. She simply smiled, looked at the piano and whispered, "It still remembers." Afterward, the young man from the music studio came over with curiosity burning in his eyes. He waited until she was done talking to others, then sat beside her gently. "You play like someone who's lived with music all her life," he said. "Did you learn in school?" She shook her head. "I never went to a proper music school. I learned by ear first, then by feeling. My father worked at a little theater, and he used to sneak me in when I was a girl. There was an old piano there. I'd watch the musicians play, then run home and try to copy what I remembered on a wooden board I made with chalk lines for keys." The young man listened, fascinated. "So when did you start playing for real?" Her eyes softened, drifting into the past. "When I was 16, she said. The theater pianist fell sick one night and they had no one else. I was there helping clean, so they asked me to fill in, just to play a few simple pieces between acts. My hands were shaking so bad I thought I'd faint, but once I started I forgot everything. The crowd, my fear, even myself. When I looked up, everyone was clapping. That was the first time I felt alive." He smiled. "And after that?" "Oh," she said, a small laugh escaping her lips. "After that, I never stopped. I played anywhere they'd let me. Cafes, hotels, even street corners when I had no stage. Music kept me company when no one else did." The young man could tell that her story had more layers, but he didn't push. There was a sadness in her eyes that made him stop. Instead, he asked gently, "What made you stop?" For a moment, she didn't answer. Her hands rested on the table, still and quiet. Then she said softly, "Life has a way of taking things from you one by one. Some you can replace, others you just learn to live without." He didn't ask more. Her tone carried enough weight that he knew it was painful. Days passed, and Grandma became a quiet part of the cafe's routine. Some mornings she played, other days she simply sat near the piano humming to herself. Regular customers began timing their visits to see her. She didn't mind the attention, though she seemed unaware of how much people adored her. One afternoon, a woman who worked nearby walked in with a small radio recorder. She politely asked, "Would you mind if I record your playing? My mother loves piano music. She's ill, and I think your sound might comfort her." Grandma smiled, nodding. "If it brings someone peace, then yes." The woman pressed record and Grandma began to play. This time the tune was light and bright, almost playful, like sunlight reflecting on water. It had a way of making people smile without realizing it. Even the cafe staff, usually busy rushing around, stopped to listen. When she finished, the woman thanked her and promised to play it for her mother. Grandma just smiled and said, "Tell her music never grows old." Later that evening, the cafe owner sat with the young man, shaking her head in disbelief. "Do you think she was famous once?" she asked. "The way she plays, and it's not normal for someone who just learned on their own." He nodded slowly. "I think there's more to her story than she lets on." The next morning, the cafe was unusually crowded again. Word had started to spread, not far, but enough that curious people came to see the mysterious old pianist. A few even brought their own instruments, hoping to play along. Grandma welcomed them kindly, but kept her own music simple, soft, letting others blend in. It was on that same morning that something unexpected happened. A man walked in, wearing a suit and carrying a camera. He introduced himself to the cafe owner as a local journalist. He had heard stories about the homeless grandma who plays like an angel and wanted to write a small piece about her. The owner hesitated. "She's shy," she warned. Please don't upset her. The man promised to be gentle. He approached Grandma after her tea and said kindly, "Ma'am, I'm writing about beautiful moments in our city. People keep mentioning you. Would you mind if I took a small video while you play?" She smiled politely. "If it helps people remember music, I don't mind," and so he recorded. She played a simple tune, something that sounded like an old lullaby. The cafe was full, yet it felt silent. Her music filled the air with warmth that no heater could provide. When she finished, everyone applauded again. The journalist thanked her and left. She thought nothing more of it. To her, it was just another day spent near her friend, the piano. But by the next week, everything would change. Before the cafe opened one morning, the young man's phone buzzed nonstop. Messages, links, notifications. "Isn't this your cafe?" one said. Another, "Look at this video." He clicked the link. It was the clip of Grandma playing. The caption read, "You won't believe what this 96-year-old homeless woman can do." Within hours, the video had thousands of views. Comments flooded in from people all over the world. "This made me cry. She plays with her soul. She reminds me of my grandmother." By noon, the cafe was packed. Reporters showed up, photographers too. Grandma didn't understand why people were staring or whispering, but she smiled as always. The owner tried to keep things calm. When the young man told her the video was all over the internet, she blinked in surprise. "Why would anyone care about an old woman like me?" she asked softly. "Because you're special," he said. "You make people feel something real." She smiled faintly. "I only play what I feel. Maybe that's why they hear it." The attention grew, but so did the confusion. Crowds came just to record her, some asking rude questions, others demanding she play certain songs. The cafe owner had to set limits. But through it all, Grandma stayed kind. She still thanked everyone. She still smiled. She still played softly, only when she wanted to. At night, after everyone left, she would sit quietly at the piano. Her fingers would rest on the keys and she'd whisper, "It's strange. After all these years, people finally hear me again." The young man sat nearby once and asked, "Did you always dream of being famous?" She shook her head. "No, I dreamed of being remembered." Her eyes filled with tears, though she didn't let them fall. "Music was my only home," she said quietly. "When I lost everything else, I kept the songs. I didn't think anyone would ever listen again." He wanted to tell her that the whole world was listening now. But he also knew fame could be both kind and cruel. For now, he just let her play, the cafe glowing softly under the evening lights. Outside, snow began to fall, gentle and white, dusting the windows. Inside, an old woman's music floated through the air, the sound of a forgotten heart learning to beat again. The next few days after the video went online were unlike anything the cafe had ever seen. It started with a few people showing up, phones in hand, asking, "Is this where the piano Grandma plays?" Then came more. By the end of the week, there were people standing outside waiting just to get a glimpse of her. The cafe, once a quiet little place, turned into a spot of wonder. Some called it the Miracle Cafe. The piano that had been nothing more than a decoration became the heart of it all. But through the noise and the attention, Grandma stayed the same. She still arrived early in the morning, greeting everyone with a gentle nod, sitting near her usual seat with her cup of tea. She didn't understand how something so small, a few minutes of playing, had reached the world. The cafe owner tried to explain how people shared videos, how thousands of strangers now knew her name. Grandma only smiled and said softly, "If my music can make people feel something again, then that's enough." Reporters began visiting. They carried microphones, cameras, and bright lights that made the little cafe seem like a stage. They asked questions about her past, about her life, about where she slept at night. She answered as kindly as she could, but she never talked much about her struggles. She always turned the conversation back to music. "Music doesn't ask where you're from," she said once. "It just asks if you're willing to listen." The video continued, spreading faster than anyone expected. People from other countries started commenting. Some said they played her song every night before bed. Others said her music made them remember their grandparents. A few even said her piano playing had helped them through sadness. But not everything was easy. The sudden fame brought chaos too. Some people wanted to take pictures with her just to post them online. A few even tried to profit from her story, selling t-shirts and posters with her image. The cafe owner did her best to protect her from the noise. She didn't want anyone using Grandma's kindness for their own gain. Still, Grandma never complained. She simply said, let them do what they must. The music belongs to everyone now. The young man from the music studio helped whenever he could. He often brought her warm food or guided her away from crowds. One evening, he found her sitting by the piano after closing hours. The cafe was empty except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of traffic outside. "Are you tired of all this attention?" he asked quietly. She looked at him and smiled. "It's not the attention that makes me tired. It's the noise that comes with it. People talk so much now, but when I play, they finally stop. That's the only peace I know." Her words stayed in his heart. He realized that for her, music wasn't about fame or recognition. It was the only place she truly felt safe. That night, he recorded her playing once more. Not for the internet, but for her. When he showed her the video the next day, she looked at the screen with wonder. "That's me?" she whispered, as if she couldn't believe it. "I look older than I feel." He laughed softly. "You play like someone who never aged at all," she chuckled, shaking her head. "That's because when I play, I'm not old anymore." As days passed, the attention grew even larger. A famous pianist shared her video online, calling her a living example of what it means to love music. News stations began running short documentaries about her. People came from distant towns just to sit and listen. The cafe owner worried it might be too much for her. "You can rest, you know," she told Grandma one morning. "You don't have to play for everyone." Grandma smiled kindly. "I don't play for everyone. I play for the piano. It listens better than most people do." Even as she said it with humor, there was truth in her words. She wasn't performing. She was sharing something that lived inside her, something that had survived all the years of loneliness and loss. One afternoon, a man walked in carrying a small bouquet of flowers. He introduced himself as a teacher from a local music school. He wanted his students to see her play. He said, "They think music is all about notes and practice. I want them to see what it really means." Grandma hesitated, but he was kind and respectful. A few days later, his class visited. They sat cross-legged on the cafe floor, their notebooks resting on their laps. Grandma sat at the piano, her thin fingers trembling slightly before she began. She played something soft, something full of emotion but not sadness. Every child listened without moving. Some looked amazed, others seemed to dream. When she finished, one of the little girls whispered, "It sounds like someone talking." Grandma smiled. "That's because the piano is talking. I'm just helping it speak." The children clapped gently, and one of them asked, "How do you know what to play?" She thought for a moment. "You don't think," she said. "You feel. Music is not about knowing which key to press. It's about knowing what your heart is trying to say." Those words spread quickly, too. The teacher later shared that moment online, calling it the lesson that changed my students' lives. It became another viral clip. People said her wisdom was even more powerful than her music, but even as her story inspired thousands, life for her remained simple. She still slept wherever she could find shelter. The cafe owner and the young man offered her a small room behind the shop, but she politely refused. "I'm used to the sky," she said. "I like to see it when I wake up." Sometimes at night she'd look through the cafe window at the piano and smile. It was the only possession she ever seemed to care about, though it wasn't even hers. One weekend, a television crew came to record a special feature on her life. They brought big lights, multiple cameras, and a team of people. She sat patiently through their interviews, answering questions about her music and her past. When they asked about fame, she said softly, "Fame is like a shadow. It follows for a while, then fades. But a song lasts forever." The interviewer asked, "Do you have any regrets?" She looked down at her wrinkled hands. "Only that I stopped playing for too long. I let life silence me. I should have kept playing, even when no one was listening." When the episode aired, millions watched it. Messages poured in from around the world. Some wanted to send her money. Others offered to record her in studios. But Grandma wasn't interested in fame or comfort. She only wanted to keep playing until she couldn't anymore. Still, something about the flood of attention began to weigh on her. The cafe, once her quiet refuge, now felt crowded. Cameras flashed too often. People shouted over one another, trying to talk to her. One day she didn't come. The young man grew worried. He searched around the nearby streets until he found her sitting on a park bench watching pigeons peck at crumbs. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. She smiled faintly. "I just needed quiet," she said. "Too many voices lately. They love the music, but they don't hear it anymore. They only hear the story." He sat beside her. "You've touched so many people. You gave them something beautiful." She nodded slowly. "I'm glad, but beauty doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the song. I was just lucky to carry it." After that, she began coming to the cafe only in the evenings when it was empty. She'd play softly in the dim light, her music drifting through the windows into the quiet streets. Sometimes people walking by would stop outside to listen, not daring to interrupt. The young man often stayed to watch. He noticed how peaceful she looked while playing, how every wrinkle on her face seemed to disappear as her fingers glided over the keys. One night, after finishing a hauntingly beautiful piece, she looked up and said, "Do you know what I wish for?" He shook his head. "I wish for one more concert," she whispered. "Not for fame, just to feel what it was like again. The lights, the people, the sound of applause. I want to say goodbye to music properly." Her wish stayed in his heart long after she left that night. He didn't know how, but he decided he would make it happen. Somehow he would find a way to give her that final concert. Outside, the city slept under soft streetlights. The cafe windows glowed faintly, and inside, the piano waited and still silent, but full of memory. And somewhere in the night, Grandma hummed a familiar tune, her voice carrying softly through the cold air. Unaware that her music had already changed the world, the cafe had become busier than ever. Each day, people gathered not only for their morning coffee, but also to see the old woman who could make a piano sing. The once-forgotten corner where she used to sit quietly was now a small stage surrounded by curious faces, flashing phones, and soft whispers of awe. Yet even with all this attention, she remained calm. She didn't seem to crave the fame or the money that others talked about. She only cared about the piano. Every time she touched the keys, her eyes glowed with a peace that no camera could capture. Some said she played from memory. Others said she played from the heart. But those who sat close enough could see that every note carried a story, a moment or maybe a memory that time had not taken away. One morning, as the cafe filled up early, a man in his late 70s entered quietly. His hair was silver and he wore a long dark coat. He looked around the room, scanning every face until his eyes rested on her. For a few seconds he just stood there frozen as if seeing a ghost. Then slowly he removed his hat and walked closer to her piano. She was playing softly, lost in a melody that drifted like a lullaby. When she looked up and saw him, her hands paused midair. Her lips trembled and a tear formed in the corner of her eye. For a moment the noise in the cafe seemed to vanish. The man took a slow breath and said quietly, "It really is you." The people nearby didn't understand what was happening, but they could feel that this moment was special. The man smiled kindly and she smiled back, her eyes filled with surprise and joy. After she finished her song, he sat beside her. They talked quietly while the cafe owner gave them space. The young man who had first noticed her weeks ago brought them tea. Everyone was curious, but no one dared interrupt. The man introduced himself as a retired music conductor. Decades ago, he had performed alongside her in a charity concert that supported families recovering from war. He told her how he had never forgotten that night, how she had played a song that made the entire hall cry. But soon after, she had disappeared. People said she moved away. Others said she had passed on. He had believed those rumors for years. "I never stopped hoping you were still alive somewhere," he said softly. She laughed gently and said, "Alive, yes. But life isn't always music and lights. Sometimes it's just quiet." He nodded with understanding. They sat in silence for a while, just listening to the low hum of the cafe. Then he said, "I saw your video. The moment I heard that melody, I knew it was you. That touch, that soul. It couldn't belong to anyone else." She looked down at her hands, aged and thin, and whispered, "I thought the world had forgotten me." "The world didn't forget," he said kindly. "It just didn't know where to find you." The cafe owner approached and asked if everything was all right. The old conductor smiled and said, "Better than all right. I found an old friend." Over the next few days, he kept returning to the cafe. They talked about the past, about the old concert halls, the musicians they once knew, and the songs that had carried them through years of change. The young man who worked nearby listened to their conversations whenever he could. To him it was like hearing two living pieces of history share secrets about a world long gone. One afternoon, the conductor had an idea. "You deserve to play one last real concert," he told her. "Not for money, not for fame, but for music. For yourself." She laughed softly and said, "I can hardly walk without trembling. Who would come to see me play?" "Everyone," he replied. "The world already loves you. Let them hear you one more time." The cafe owner agreed. The young man offered to help with sound and lighting. News spread quickly through the neighborhood. The legendary grandma pianist will perform one final time. Musicians from nearby schools volunteered to accompany her. Local artists offered to decorate the cafe. Even people who had never met her showed up just to lend a hand. For days, the cafe buzzed with excitement. Chairs were moved, lights were strung across the ceiling, and the piano was carefully cleaned and tuned. The old woman watched them work with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. She often said, "All this just for me?" The conductor would smile and answer, "For you and for everyone you've touched." When the day of the concert arrived, people filled every seat. Some stood outside, peering through the windows just to catch a glimpse. The cafe smelled of fresh coffee and roses brought in by admirers. The lights were dim, and the piano stood in the center, polished to a shine that reflected the soft glow of the lamps above. As she entered, the room fell silent. She was helped to her seat by the conductor. Though her hands shook, her eyes were steady. She looked at the crowd, smiled gently, and whispered into the microphone, "Thank you for listening. It's been a long time since I played for anyone other than myself." Then she began. The first note filled the room like a whisper, turning into a breath of life. Her hands, though wrinkled and frail, moved gracefully across the keys. The music flowed like water, gentle but powerful. Every chord carried emotion so deep that people couldn't help but tear up. The conductor stood nearby, eyes glistening, following every movement as if conducting invisible strings of memory. The young man watched from the back, recording the performance quietly. Not for the internet this time, but just to remember it forever. As the night went on, she played pieces from her youth, waltzes, lullabies, and a few original tunes she hadn't played since she was a young woman. The cafe, once noisy and busy, now felt like a sacred space. No one spoke. Even the air seemed still. At one point, she stopped and looked up. Her eyes found the conductor's, and she said, "Do you remember this one?" He nodded. She played a piece they had once performed together, a duet from their youth. It was slow and tender, filled with pauses that carried more meaning than words ever could. The conductor softly hummed the notes, his old voice trembling with emotion. When the song ended, the crowd erupted in applause. She smiled but didn't bow. Instead, she said, "This song was my goodbye years ago, but I think it's time to play one more, for all of you who still believe music can heal." The final song was new. It wasn't written anywhere, and no one recognized the tune. It sounded like a mixture of everything she had ever played: joy, pain, love, loss, and peace. Every note was like a piece of her life stitched into melody. People later said that the song felt alive, as if it spoke to every listener personally. Some heard hope, others heard memories of their parents' childhood or long-lost dreams. When the song ended, she looked around at the faces before her, strangers who had become part of her story. She smiled, her eyes wet with tears, and whispered, "Thank you. You've given me back my life." The crowd stood and clapped, many wiping their eyes. The conductor helped her stand. She hugged him tightly, resting her head against his shoulder. For the first time in decades, she felt truly seen, truly loved. That night, after the cafe had emptied, she stayed behind with the conductor and the young man. The three of them sat quietly around the piano. The lights were dim, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. She placed her hand on the piano one last time and said, "It feels alive again." "It always was," the conductor replied. "It was just waiting for you." The young man smiled softly. "The world needed this," he said. "You reminded us that beauty doesn't fade. It just waits for someone brave enough to bring it back." The old woman laughed gently. "Maybe so, but now it's time to rest. Let the piano sing for others." They said their goodbyes with tears and smiles. She walked slowly toward the door, her steps unsteady but full of grace. The conductor watched her go, knowing this might be the last time he would see her. Outside, The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement. She looked up at the sky, whispered something no one could hear, and smiled as if answering an old friend's call. That night, the cafe stayed open late, filled with soft chatter about her music, her story, and her spirit. Everyone felt they had witnessed something rare, not just a performance, but a piece of human history come alive again. And though the piano now sat silent, its presence filled the room with warmth, as if it too was still humming the echoes of her final songs. The next morning the cafe felt different. The sunlight poured through the windows, soft and golden, touching every table and chair as if blessing the place. The piano stood in the middle, its surface still shining from the night before. The room carried the faint echo of her final song, a melody that refused to fade away. The cafe owner walked around slowly, replaying the memories of the concert in his head. It was the most beautiful night he had ever witnessed. People were still talking about it. Some had cried, others had smiled, and everyone had left with their hearts full. The old woman had left early that morning. She told the cafe owner she needed to take a walk by the river to clear her mind. He offered to send someone with her, but she laughed and said, "I've walked alone most of my life." "One more walk won't hurt," he didn't insist. He watched her go, her steps slow but steady, her coat fluttering slightly in the cool air. There was something peaceful about her, something that said she had finally found what she'd been searching for. The day passed quietly. People kept coming into the cafe, still moved by what they had seen. Some left flowers near the piano, others left small notes of thanks. The young man from the studio arrived with his camera to check the video he had recorded the night before. He told the cafe owner, "This isn't just a video. It's history. People need to see this." The owner nodded. "Yes," he said softly, "but show it gently. It's not just a performance, it's her soul." By afternoon, the conductor returned. He looked tired but happy. He sat by the piano, running his fingers over the keys without pressing them. He said quietly, "She played like she was saying goodbye." The cafe owner nodded slowly. "Yes," he whispered. "I felt that too." The young man promised to edit the recording and post it online the next day. Everyone was eager to share her gift with the world once again. That evening, as the cafe began to close, the owner received a call. His expression changed slowly as he listened. He didn't say much, just nodded and whispered, "I see." When he put the phone down, the room fell silent. The young man and the conductor watched him, waiting. With a shaky breath, the owner said quietly, "She's gone." The words hung in the air like a soft echo that refused to settle. The conductor stood up, eyes wide. "What do you mean?" he asked. "They found her near the river," the owner said, his voice trembling. "She was sitting on a bench looking at the water, peaceful. She must have gone in her sleep." No one spoke for a while. The cafe felt still, as if even the air was holding its breath. The conductor sat down again and placed his hand on the piano. "She died the way she lived," he said softly, quietly, beautifully, without asking for anything. The next day, news spread quickly. People who had seen her concert came back to the cafe, some carrying flowers, others bringing candles. The cafe owner cleared a small space near the piano and placed her old shawl there, the one she used to wrap around her shoulders every morning. Someone printed a picture from her concert, a moment where she was smiling with her hands resting on the keys, and placed it beside the piano. Within hours, the cafe turned into a place of remembrance. People came from all over, some strangers, some old friends who had lost touch with her decades ago. The conductor stayed there most of the day, greeting visitors, telling them stories about her early years. He spoke about the time they performed together, how her playing could make an entire hall silent, how her music always carried emotion that words could never express. The young man uploaded her final performance online. He titled it, "The Last Song of the Legendary Grandma Pianist." The video spread like wildfire. Within days, it reached millions of views. Comments poured in from every corner of the world. People wrote things like, "I've never felt music like this," and "Her fingers told a story no one can forget." Many said they cried without knowing why. News channels talked about her again. But this time there was no noise, no rush, no flashing cameras chasing her. It was all love, respect, and silence. Her story became more than just a viral video. It became a symbol of how beauty can survive in the most unexpected places. Weeks passed, but her presence never really left the cafe. Every morning, the owner would open the doors and look at the piano. The sunlight would always hit it in the same way, as if she was still there waiting to play. Sometimes customers said they could almost hear soft music when the cafe was empty. The owner never denied it. He just smiled and said, "Maybe it's her way of saying hello." A month later, the conductor and the young man organized a small event in her memory. They invited everyone who had known her, or even just seen her video. The cafe was filled again, just like the night of her last concert. The conductor stood in front of the piano and spoke softly. "She taught us that greatness doesn't need a stage," he said. "All it takes is love, patience, and a heart that refuses to stop dreaming." Then he asked one of the music students who had helped before to play the piano. The young girl was nervous, but the conductor said gently, "Don't try to play like her. Play for her." When the girl began, the same hush fell over the crowd. The music was simple, pure, and full of feeling. People closed their eyes and listened. Some cried silently, others smiled through tears. When the song ended, everyone stood and clapped, not for the girl, but for the woman who had started it all. The cafe owner decided to rename the place. He put up a small wooden sign above the piano that read, "The Grandma's Piano Room." Below it, in smaller letters, he added, "She came with nothing but left us her song." The piano was never moved again. No one sat on the stool without permission. It wasn't just an instrument anymore, it was a piece of her spirit. The cafe became a symbol of hope. People came from far and wide, not just for coffee, but to sit quietly near the piano and feel the calm that seemed to fill the air. Sometimes the conductor would come in and play a soft tune in her memory. The young man would visit too, bringing his camera, capturing how strangers still left flowers and letters beside the piano. One letter simply read, "You reminded me that it's never too late to live." The video of her final performance continued to spread. Musicians began to cover her songs, and schools used her story to teach about passion and perseverance. A famous pianist even played her final melody during a world concert and said, "This one is for the grandma who taught us all what music really means." Years later, people still remembered her. Children who grew up hearing her story would visit the cafe, sit near the piano and ask, "Is this where the grandma played?" And the cafe owner, older now, would smile and say, "Yes, right there." And when she played, the whole world listened. Even after time passed and faces changed, the spirit of the old woman stayed. Her music had done something few people ever achieve. It had brought people together. Strangers had become friends. Hearts had healed and dreams had been awakened, all because one old woman dared to touch a piano again after a lifetime of silence. Late one evening, long after the cafe had closed, the owner sat alone looking at the piano. The lights were dim and the street outside was quiet. He reached out and pressed a single key. The note echoed softly through the room. He smiled and whispered, "Good night, Grandma." The sound lingered in the air, gentle and warm, like a soft goodbye that would never fade. Her story, her music, and her spirit lived on, not just in that small cafe, but in every heart that had ever heard her play. And somewhere, in the quiet of memory and melody, she was still there. An old woman with a kind smile, her fingers dancing on invisible keys, filling the world once more with music that would never die.